Hey everyone, welcome to my first installment of a new series we're going to dub Deck Building Bootcamp. Today we're going to break down 5 simple tips to help you in deck building. A lot of my viewers are probably already well-versed deck builders, but I think everyone can use a refresher as the format is constantly changing and it's always best to start with fundamentals. These are, in my mind, 3 core fundamental truths about Magic the Gathering. 1. Magic at its core is a game of leveraging resources to gain advantage over your opponents. 2. Magic is designed with variance in mind to punish greedy deck building and reward good deck building. And 3. Magic allows you, the deck builder, to present your pile of format legal cards as best you see fit, whether for fun or competition. Let's zero in on that first truth about Magic, and the fact that you often need to use your resources better or more efficiently than your opponents in order to win the game in 60 card constructed formats. This is only exacerbated in Commander when you have 3 opponents to outpace. Outpace is often the operative word here. You're not directly fighting 3 opponents, as the table will all kind of work together to chip down life totals and remove resources. You want to be the one doing it the fastest, the hardest, and the most consistently. Notably, you need to accomplish this in 2 ways, leading to our first and second points of deck building. 1, the more efficient your deck is, the more likely it will work. I know this is obvious, but in a 4-player game, sometimes the win is just doing your thing, and you don't want to get left behind while the rest of the table does theirs. This is no longer Boomer Commander. Players are entering the game with powerful new sets like Modern Horizons, Lord of the Rings, and Final Fantasy. This is great because more players get to play the game, but the flip side of that coin is new players are bringing a higher average power level to the game because they're not playing with their old cards that they find fun. They're playing with the new cards that are fire design pushed, and their Grandpa's deck has no bad cards. You have probably experienced an upward shift in power in your playgroup or LGS over time from all the new must-have cards coming out, and these players are only playing with those cards. These new players don't have the retroactive interference of older, more costly cards clogging up their draws. You can still play your older cards that are efficient, but gone are the days of slamming 6, 7, and 8 drop bombs turn after turn. After doing nothing but play a 2-drop rock, a 3-drop rock, a 4-drop rock, and then said 7 and 8 drops. You can play up to a handful of bombs, but they need to synergize with your deck in a massive way, or they're not worth running. You can't just tap out for an 8-drop and not go off, or at a minimum put yourself way ahead, whether through committing a ton to the board, or destroying your opponent's board, or drawing a ton of cards. Hellkite Tyrant is a pipe dream even in a deck containing artifacts and red cards because your opponents will never let it survive. One-Horned Dracosaur is also a removal magnet because it draws you cards and gives you mana and bodies, but your opponents aren't directly incentivized to kill it. They're only incentivized to kill it so you don't have it. And also costs 1 mana less, but it is definitely better in a vacuum and more likely to stick around. Remember, your opponents might even have artifacts. The Dracosaur is better in almost any situation except where you have a haste enabler, your opponent has a ton of artifacts, and they're willing to let you both attack them, steal all their shit, and then let get back to your turn, which is, again, a pipe dream. 7 mana is way too late in the game to be doubling your mana. Again, you already have 7 mana. The drawing off creature ETB clause on Zendikar Resurgent is available on much more efficient cards that are often themselves creatures and draw you extra cards. You draw multiple. And yes, there are multiple other versions of this effect, and while this one has a second effect, I would argue paying 3 additional mana is not worth a premium for that second effect. In terms of mana value, that price does seem worth it for the combination of these two essentially different cards in one card. The problem is this 7-drop means you're not getting that effect until 3 turns later, and that tempo loss is going to destroy you. This card just sits in your hand all game, and then when you finally play it, you have to wait to untap with it against 3 other players who have seen you place the kick me sign on your own back and will be happy to oblige you. So this is definitely worse as a land ramp option than Cultivator Colossus, which also draws you cards when you play extra lands, which is simultaneously ramping you and drawing extra cards and putting a massive body on the board, which makes you less likely to be attacked instead of more. And on top of that, when they remove the Colossus, which they will try to do, same as the Resurgence, those lands and card advantage already happened, even if this is removed immediately, unlike Zendikar Resurgence. Additionally, all these creature threat options synergize with what Green wants to do, which is play creatures and draw cards and ramp, whereas Zendikar Resurgence is a clunky enchantment in your predominantly creature-based deck. It even wants creatures itself. Why not just play creatures that want creatures, and creatures that ramp? Or, equally effective, having an alternate casting cost or mode you can cast if you don't have, say, 7 mana. Like Overlord of the Baelmerk in black or Virtue of Persistence, these both have a 2 mana option, and you still get the 5 mana bomb or 7 mana bomb, but you have a thing to do early with your mana. Whereas outside of random deck, I would never consider running Shieldred, and even in those decks, a better option like Arcana Cruelty possibly, or Junji for its flexibility and the loops it can make. And that's just in mono black. There's tons of other better options if you're doing Animator and multicolor. In white, Avacyn of Hope is the most overrated card outside of exactly a Reanimator deck, because if your plan is to play Avacyn and Wrath, that's 12 mana. The game is already over. Not to mention half your own Wraths also exile the things anyway, so you have to downgrade your Wraths to play a bad card. Just run Moonslinger Cavalry. It's actually cheaper financially, and it outright wins the game. It's White's Crater Hook, and White as a color tends to go wide with small things, which your opponents aren't really incentivized to kill with removal spells anyway. Like, the indestructible is much less valuable than just having dead opponents. Which leads to our fourth universal truth about Magic the Gathering, in that games gotta end, which is made even more important in light of the recent CDH fiasco. The whole cycle of Ancient Dragons from D&D is overpriced and overrated, but as a whole, the cards effects are definitely very powerful, but not very good, because they're very clunky cards and they require actually connecting, as opposed to the modern design of just attack or enter even. I think the play patterns of red make the ancient Copper Dragon the clear forerunner because you can give it haste, and also just getting a ton of mana is great in red. Ancient Brass Dragon is in black, so you can cheat on the mana cost with reanimate spells, and then it further helps you reanimate, which you want to be doing in black anyway. But in general, their price tags are not worth it. And without any kind of setup, these cards will often just be a dud when you play them. They will immediately eat a cheap removal spell and put you at a tempo loss to the whole table. I think especially in blue, you have better options than Ancient Silver Dragon. Consecration Sphinx exists. I don't run it. It's also a game changer. But you also have a sweet, please give me all them cards Zeosaur in Nezahal the Primal Tide. It can't be countered, so it does resolve. And then once in play, it's hard to remove because you can just flicker itself by discarding cards. And it draws you a card whenever an opponent casts a non-creature, which is going to happen at least once per turn cycle in most games, usually more than once. To be honest, more than just replacing bombs with other bombs, Commander in this day and age is more about finding the efficient threats that scale very effectively with your deck. And those kind of things become bombs because of how your deck is built, not because they cost 7 mana and are a powerful effect on their own. Synergy decks filled with cards like Dreamtide Whale tend to do much better than cards that are filled with bombs that, on their own, yes, are very powerful, but they come down turns later and they don't help the rest of the deck. If this section got you hot and bothered and you want to play bombs in Commander, I recommend checking out 2 of my deck techs from previous videos. I have Rafine's Scheming Seer, which is a reanimator deck that plays tons of bombs, and Etali Primal Conqueror that just turbo ramps and plays bombs off the top. And those links are going to be in the description. However, if you're willing to look at the deck building process and consider, hey, maybe I can improve these decks, maybe I can make them more efficient, let's press onward. Remember, even back in the day, there were still 8 drops that won the game, and there's even more now. If your late game plays don't steer you towards a win, you need to have a darn good reason to be running them. Conversely, you can just be the problem out the gates. The average CMC of decks in EDH Rec has steadily gone down, from 3.9 in 2019 to 3.3 now. Take my most recent deck tech, Gix Yawgmoth Predator, as an example. The deck is definitely an aggro deck, but occurs out at 5, with only 2 5-drops. In Mono Black, I'm sure you've guessed one of the cards, even without watching the video. Of course, it's Gary, Grey Merchant of Asphodel. The other is Bloodthirsty Conqueror, whose effect sends the deck in overdrive, not to mention comes with a 5/5 flying Death Touch body, and that's just a 5-drop. The deck has 39 0-2 drops, and an average castable CMC of 2.22. Is this exceedingly under average? Yes. But if you're an aggro deck, your cards need to be effective turns earlier. Outpace before you're outclassed. Remember, it's 1v1v1v1, but that's more of a race than it is a straight up 3v1. So if you get down earlier and attack earlier, you can win earlier. Somebody's got to win the race, and if you put a bunch of clunky cards in your deck that can't be played in the first few turns of the game, you effectively miss the starting gun. And the higher your average CMC, the more likely it is you'll be stuck with those clunky cards in your hand, rotting away, wishing you were more prepared for the challenge. So, how can we improve? The simple answer is reduce the mana cost of cards you run, but how are we going to do that? Enter Moxfield, the best deck building tool out there. Not a sponsor, they're just awesome, and more importantly, an absolutely free tool at your disposal. One of the best tools they have is the View Changer, where you can sort your cards by mana value as one of the options. It has many other uses for specific decks, like type or color or creature type, but simply the best view for your deck's organization in a vacuum is by CMC. This will help you trim the fat. So in deck building, it's the tool I use the most often. You want to have a lean, mean commander machine that runs how you want it to all the time. Playing one card a turn, you will quickly fall behind. And outside of green, the ramp options often aren't enough to cast 2 fat spells on curve, but 2 leaner spells can and should be cast in rapid succession to win games. The game is only so many turns, make sure you're able to cast your spells during yours. We'll get to that in a later point about variants as well, but some cards are past the prime, it does hurt to say. You can still have a pet 6-drop or 2 in your higher powered decks, but keep it to a minimum unless they are a powerful engine that will greatly contribute to a victory. At the bottom of the page in moxfield, you can also find your deck's average CMC, and it will show you what types of cards there are as well, but we're going to focus on the CMC for the most part. Without heavy ramp, you don't want to be over a low 3, or you won't be double spelling until you have 7 mana, which could be in the late game when some players are already setting up to take down the entire table. Remember, if you're below 3.3, you're going to be, on average, faster at casting your spells than your opponents. If you're over 3.3, you need to be running more ramp than average. Or if you're well under 3.3 like the Gix deck, you can run much less ramp and just deploy your spells on curve. and rely on cheaper spells and card advantage engines to make sure you find your lands. Another often forgotten reason to keep your curve low is to have the ability to interact. Sure, you can play tap out sorcery speed magic. It is more at home in Command and other formats. However, it will not increase how well you do or your agency in the game, which to me make the game more fun. I like winning. I like feeling like my decisions mattered. Once you get to bracket 3, I would expect my opponents to have some mana open in the mid game, turns 4 to 5 onward. Unless they're running free interaction, which if you can do, you should do. It's objectively better. Don't just roll over and die if an opponent presents a win. I myself have some clunky cards in decks that I enjoy playing with, and that is okay, but use sparingly. Alternatively, you can run more ramp. However, this has diminishing returns after a certain point, where running leaner, more effective cards does not. Some amount of ramp is almost always necessary, but I think players take a cookie cutter approach with templates too often instead of prescribing the ramp needs to fit the deck. For instance, the Gix deck has 7 sources of ramp, 2 amongst its lands, so it is sacrificing very few of its actual spell slots for ramp spells, and is instead relying on very efficient spells. The Dragonhawk Fate's Tempest deck is also an aggro deck, but it's running 18 sources of ramp, including 2 amongst the lands, and to their cost reduction, which will help a higher CMC deck double spell more often. But that's more because the cards are less efficient and therefore need to be ramped out on time in order to cast more spells. Etali Primal Conqueror is the most ramp heavy with 25 sources of ramp. Literally 1 in 4 cards is a ramp spell because the bombs are so prevalent. And this deck doesn't rely on synergies. This deck relies on purely ramp and bombs. Hopefully this illustrates why cookie cutter deck templates are often a detriment to deck building. This is just for ramp. This doesn't even include how many removal spells, how many threats, how many lands, how many bombs, how much interaction. Not to mention, they always say you need to run X amount of rats, and I think that's blatantly untrue. Some decks don't even want rats. I think templates are actively harmful to deck building. I think you need to pick a commander, find the cards that work well with it, then determine what your curve looks like, how many lands you need, how many ramp spells, etc. And I think there is no template. You just need to get in tune with the process. And Moxfield is a great tool to help that. Not a sponsor, but I promise you seeing the entire deck lined up will help, especially if you put it in the CMC view, so you know what cards are clogging up your curve and what cards are efficient. Speaking of cards that clog up your CMC, there are some cards that on paper have a casting cost of 7, but maybe cost 3, or cards that have different modes. You cast one mode over the other, or effects like Blasphemous Act that reduce the card's casting cost. So in Moxfield, you just go on the right side of each card in your deck list. There's a drop-down menu, and you can change mana cost, and you manually input the cost, and that's it. Sometimes, pure efficiency is not enough. In Gix's case, the commander itself is an engine, so the efficient cards power up his card draw ability or second ability. Other commanders either draw cards or produce mana, often amongst the most powerful, as you can spend less card slots in your deck to do things that are often crucial to accruing resources faster or in greater quantity in accordance with our first truth about magic. It is at its core a game of leveraging resources to gain advantage over your opponents. In addition to slimming the mana cost of your cards to make sure you can cast them earlier and in greater quantity, kind of like better mileage per gallon, you want a source of cards to ensure you can use the gas, like an engine to make sure your machine is actually running once you accelerate out of your driveway and get to highway speeds, aka the mid to late game. And just in case I haven't thrown enough car analogies at you, at the end of the day, your commander deck is a machine with 99 shuffling parts that you want to run smoothly. If you aren't drawing cards or immediately murdering your opponents with the cards you have, you are falling behind and maybe even stalling out. Switching lanes, I'm so sorry. We get to our second fundamental truth about Magic the Gathering. Magic is designed with variance in mind to punish greedy deck building and reward good deck building. Since Magic's inception, its mana system was one of the greatest aspects of the game. You could build whatever deck you wanted, but there were limitations to how greedy you could be, since you need to accommodate deck slots for enough lands, and additionally enough lands to create each color of mana you require for your cards. This means players couldn't be greedy and run every single card, they had to carve out sections of the color pie they would use. And these sections of the color pie have strengths and weaknesses in and of themselves, to again help with that balancing. Today, things are very different, with 5-color decks hanging their head over Commander, hinging on the power of green non-basic land ramp. But for the majority of its existence, true 5-color decks in Magic the Gathering were a rarity, with most decks settling between 1 to 3 colors to ensure they could cast their spells in a timely fashion. In formats with exclusively older cards like pre-modern, decks mostly are 1 to 2 colors, since the mana fixing was less all-encompassing. 5-color decks often devolve into good stuff piles, and outside of CEDH with 10 fetches and perfect mana, I would argue not only are 5-color decks often less interesting, but they're often less consistent and therefore worse than their 2 to 3 color counterparts. As you add colors to your commander color identity, you lose consistency at the price of power in Magic's natural inherent balancing act. Getting access to more cards and combos, having to include more life loss in your mana base, not being able to use pip-intensive cards in the early game, not being able to reliably run utility lands. 2-3 color decks are the sweet spot, where you often won't feel the damage of multiple pip mana cards, but in a 5-color deck, you can really struggle without getting all of your triumphs or rainbow lands. For newer players, I would recommend 1 and 2 color decks as their best starting point. Not only is the mana cleaner, but they're often more fun as they're streamlined in function and purpose, which simultaneously reduces the other potentially unfun variants of Commander, being 99 card singleton. In some ways, this is exciting, but occasionally your cards don't do what you want them to do because you have singletons. Please limit the number of narrow corner case cards you run in your decks. Looking at you, Ink Shield and Deflecting Palm. So picking more generally good or proactive cards is often better, and having some overlapping card functionality is important for deck synergy. If your commander cares about a thing, your deck should be at least 33 cards of that thing, not counting lands. You want to see the effect you built the deck for. Makes sense, right? My first deep dive deck was for Dragonhawk Fate's Tempest. The deck is a bracket 3 with Jessica's Will and Deflecting Swat, which mono red desperately needs, but the rest of the cards are very similar, and the majority are downright bad in Commander. However, it can compete with and often wipe the floor with the higher powered bracket 3 decks. Why? The consistency. The singular focus on just doming opponents with Dragonhawk's ETB and attack triggers. There are 38 creatures in the deck, and every single one of them meets the condition Dragonhawk wants to see. There are additionally 3 non-creatures that make 4 power creatures as well, and the deck has 5 card advantage sources of 99, which in mono red is a lot. Card advantage will help increase your consistency and decrease variance because you see more of the deck and are therefore more likely to see the cards you need. There are 5 haste enablers and tons of additional damage sources in the deck. Not to mention the commander is an absurd engine that deals damage and effectively draws cards, usually 1 land and 1 spell, with the rest becoming damage, but you see up to 10-20 cards sometimes. The deck packs little removal because it makes itself the problem to solve with its dedication and singular focus to dish out massive damage to the table. This deck naturally fights variance by being extremely focused and seeing tons of cards by virtue of the commander, which is even more of a feat in mono red, notoriously victims of top decking, which can lead to bad play experience. By having tons of card advantage, having overlapping function of cards, and finally running the correct amount of lands by integrating spells to the mana base, this deck is a powerhouse that very frequently and consistently enacts its game plan. That's right. You thought we could do a fundamentals video without telling you to run more lands? Think again. Each of Reggie's people. This commander costs 5. Anything less than 39 to 40 lands, and you will rarely slam it on curve. And if your aggro deck isn't curving out, you will lose. End of story. Worse than that, you most likely won't have a fun experience, unless you like going to the playground and watching everybody else play as a kid while you sulk under the willow tree, but I sure didn't. Cheating on land count is only cheating yourself. Cheating on land functionality is cheating the table. Stop trying to cut lands and start adding lands that are functionally spells. Dragonhawk is in mono red, so its options for utility lands may seem limited, but because we don't need a second color, we get access to great colorless utility options in Command Beacon. With a crucial commander, we must run this card. We need to get Dragonhawk in play. War Room to draw cards, since we're the aggressor, and Myriad Landscape for permanent ramp in a color that lacks it. For haste to turbocharge our commander, often representing an additional 10 points of burst damage, we have Hall of the Bandit Lord, Hammer Battlements, and Arena of Glory. In the Piece de Resistance, the MDFCs, literal spells or lands that are the single best thing to reduce mana floods / mana screw variance that will disproportionately hurt newer or less experienced players, but happens to everybody. In this case, we're running Sundering Eruption, the most playable mono red, but this deck is also running a Cool Warrior since it's a 4-power red creature, if we need another one. Red is probably the color with the least playable MDFCs, but Sundering Eruption is massive, often destroying the best land an opponent controls, and then murdering a player or two once only flyers can block this turn. The floor is much needed utility, and the ceiling is winning you the game. And it's a land when you need one. This goes in every 1 and 2 color red deck, and there's an argument for putting in 3 color ones. Brace yourself, we're about to go over all the playable MDFCs for players that were sleeping under a rock. Red also has great card selection options in Valakut Awakening, Aflame Kazul's Fury, and Spikefield Hazard is an all-star on my Omnix list deck, where it triggers the commander and is a great option where the need for flexibility and low mana costs are an all-time high. Lastly, Pinnacle Monk is great in Blink or Spell Slinging, and is tutorable with Imperial Recruiter in the same color. Speaking of Omnix list and similar excellent top card advantage cards in red, those decks especially want to be efficient and have overlapping card function, as every card you don't want to cast impulsively provides tension to the game plan, and also effectively loses you a card draw. I would argue decks like Faldorn, Omnixilus, Prosper, and Lelia need to be extremely low curve because you want to get the most of the cards you only have early, which means you need to cast them when you can cast them. Otherwise, they are gone forever. Luckily, Dragonhawk removes this problem because unused cards turn into catastrophic damage. But I always see deck text for Faldorn and the like with random 7 drops that just have no place in the deck. They're effectively a wasted use of the upside of your deck every time you hit them. That's a pipe dream. These commanders want to vomit out efficient spells, and the one large spell Faldorn gets to run is Crater Hoof to end the game with Elder Wolf. So there are lower mana cost counterparts like Shared Animosity or Beastmaster Ascension that arguably do the thing without possibly denying yourself card draw, maybe even better cards are greater from the deck, and can be played and left in play so you don't lose your card advantage. Let me know in the comments if you want a Falcon or Omnixos deck, as they're both wildly fun commanders when below the ground, aiming right for the jugular. And I do feel like a lot of deck techs these decks have online don't do the cards justice. But I digress. Black gets Molecular Rebirth for every deck, and Aghaim's Awakening for non-budget decks, then Father Profane for decks that want extra removal. Though this is the color that has the most potential for MD to seize, and the least need for removal, since it often wants to be doing Cabal Coffer shenanigans and maxing out on swamps. Boggart Trawler can be used instead or in conjunction with Bajuka Bog, see if game against graveyard players, and trust me, we are out there. Blue gets Sink into Stupor and Seagate Restoration, although admittedly has no good budget options outside of Glasswell Mimic, which is a clone for you only. But this is still a great effect because it could also be a land. White has Retreat to Emeria. Sure, it's expensive at 7 mana, but it gives you 2 4/4 flying angel bodies, and it makes your board destructible until your next turn, which protects you from wraths. That being said, it's still much better than a basic plains or even a fancy dual land. It also gets a protection spell in Sejiri Shelter for commanders that need to be protected, a weak overrun in McKinney Stampede for go wide decks, and a removal spell for go wide decks in Career Takedown, as well as an expensive, in my opinion, unplayable Wrath and Ondu inversion. 8 mana reset is not my cup of tea. Witch Enchanter is the best MDFC in white and should go in pretty much every single white deck, but especially blink decks. It's Reclamation Sage, but the flip side is also a land. Green gets some goodies, when don't they? In Polygon Recovery, which is either a land or regrowth. Tangleflora Hedron, which is either a land or mana dork. Turn Timber Symbiosis, which is often one of the best mythics as it flops a creature into play, and if it's small, it gets 3/1 counters. Bridgeworks Battle to pump a creature in fight, so decent removal option for mono green. And arguably the best in green, Disciple of Freyalise, which sacks a big creature to gain life and draw cards, and is tutorable off of Fierce Empath in the same colors. For multicolor, 3 stand out above the rest. Revitalizing Repass is on rate as a 1-mana hybrid cost protection spell. Waterlogged Teachings is a 4-mana tutor for an instant or a card with flash. Stump Stomp is a great bite spell. This is situationally better because it's Gruul and they really need an answer to stuff, and this is one of the best Gruul removal spells. Ironically, it's also a land. Legion Leadership's okay if your commander has high power or you're building a Voltron deck, but outside that I wouldn't run it. But if you're in Boros, you're probably building a Voltron deck. It's not just MDFCs. This is going to turn into a full-on lands PSA, but there are plenty of utility lands that are worth running. If you're in Dimir colors, Port of Carfel is instant speed, mill, and reanimator on a land. Yes, the mana cost is expensive at 6 total mana plus the land itself, but you get back the best threat in your graveyard and the next 4 cards. So this card is, and auto-include is also very cheap at like less than $1. This gets better in Sultai with the ability to recur lands, notably Life in the Loam, and especially in the Commander Taval the Balanced Scale. This card is very good and very affordable. Put it in your Dimir X decks. Tomb Fortress, if you're in mono black, is definitely worth running. However, it's not really a budget option and does kind of work in opposition to Cabal Coffers, so keep that in mind when building any mono black deck. One thing that doesn't work against Cabal Coffers is Demolition Field, which can blow up an opponent's utility lands and then get you back a swamp. This should also go in any landfall deck full stop. It's a much better budget option than fetch lands and has added utility. Guard Armory should go in any Boros equipment deck, and even honestly decks that aren't fully dedicated to equipment. It's still a tutor for any equipment, maybe a Skull Clamp, and it's on a land. All these spells on lands make your land draws much more palatable, and I think in this day and age, there are so many good options like this that you should never be running under 38 lands. You have utility lands that count as spells, put them in your deck. All the channel lands are worth running, but Besaitu is very expensive, so is Otawara, the 2 best ones. That being said, the red one is more affordable and can go in most decks, and especially decks that want to go wide. And the black one, Takanuma, is a nice tool for decks that are not mono black that use the graveyard. 1 and 2 color red decks get access to Arena of Glory. It's a haste enabler that can work on 2 creatures, so this card is amazing. And if you're in monocolor, you also have access to the All the Bandit Lore that has a cheaper printing and around $10 still, but definitely worth running in monocolor decks if you need haste, like my Dragonhawk deck, or things like Liesa with lifelink to get the life back immediately. Rogue's Passage has the downside of being colorless, but it is a nice way to give your commander unblockable, so great in Voltron decks or decks with commanders that have a ton of damage output on their own. I say Wolf Run is arguably better if you're in Gruul because you can respond to whatever your opponent's block and then pump through the damage on whatever creature you want. If you're going wide, you've also got great options in Gavany Township in Selesnya and also the Archangel in Orzhov to make your tokens that much more effective. And these are great because they're both budget options and a reason to run more land. Warren Reef the Vastwood is great in green decks that want to put counters on things, or just green go wide decks because it counts every single creature at the end of this turn and gives them a 1/1 counter, and it costs just 1 tap to activate. However, it does come in tapped. But again, great budget option for go wide green decks. All the Eldraine castles, save the blue one, are playable in monocolor decks, but they're all very good in their own ways. Spymaster's Vault is great in any Aristocrats deck. Get it in there, you're going to be in black anyway. Run that card. Hunter's Enclave is a budget option that draws you cards if you run big stuff, which most decks do at this point. And as far as manlands go, I like the black green because Death Touch is a nice blocker to hold up. And realistically, if you're in a bracket 1 or 2 deck, you can definitely run manlands. They're like actual cards. People hate on these, but it's still a body as a land. And if you're in the slower brackets, the tap land won't matter as much. Not to mention in Jund, Lava Clarishes plus Blossoming Tortoise is a 1-hit KO against one player. Restless Vinestalk and Simic is also quite good because it neuters one of your opponent's defenders. And as itself is a 5/5 attacker. Not to mention these are all pretty budget at this point because people are sleeping on them still. I'm not saying manlands are going to win you the game, but they'll increase your odds of drawing a non-useless card in the late game, and I think one of them has very low opportunity cost. The more lands you run, the better chance you have to fit a tap land into your plays and sequencing, because you'll have other lands to play when you need them. And if you want one that comes untapped in the early game, we have Lair of the Hydra. It's also the most mana efficient. Coven Encampment goes in every Mardu deck, but it's also just a great card. It gives you the option to have free sacrifice fodder whenever you attack, and 2 attackers. Foundport is a colorless land, but it makes tokens and sacrifices tokens to do stuff. This card is a bomb, but it's not as budget. It's only $5 though. And then if you're in mono black or a black deck that uses the graveyard, Crypt of Academe is a must. You can basically get a second Cobalt Coffers. This card's amazing. I think people are kind of down on the town cycle, but they're still great. It's just a spell on a land. Uh, these are not as good as just full on MDFCs because you have to cast the spell first and play the land tapped if you want to get both. But again, these are just additional ways to get value out of land drops. The hidden land cycle are okay, but if you're in a budget, they're definitely great options to turn your lands into literal cards. These are much better if you have ways to recur lands and a low curve. Archway of Innovation is amazing in blue decks or artifact decks or even treasure decks. These are in my mind the most generically good utility lands, but there are much more niche ones, much more expensive ones, things like typo ones that go in every single zombie deck or bird deck, for instance. But these are lands you can put in your deck and generally make it better. The flexibility of being a land when you need it makes you significantly better than whatever spells you're running instead of lands. Usually your 63rd to 70th cards. When I see a 30 land count deck without insane amounts of fast mana and tutors, I cringe. I don't play CDH, but I have friends who have mulligan to Oblivion running 30 lands. Don't let that be you. Your opponents hate sitting and watching you, and it's kind of cheating. Run more lands, you'll be glad you did. I'm going to end this PSA on a happy little disclaimer by referring to the third truth about Magic. Magic allows you, the deck builder, to present your pile of format legal cards as best you see fit, whether for fun or competition. I like to build decks that are consistent and powerful, but as in all my videos, these are only meant to be taken as tips and tools to improve your deck building or spark creativity in you. One of the main reasons Magic has survived as a game is how open-ended it is. Commander is the most popular format, directly because you can run whatever the fudge you want, and with the bracket system in place, you're less likely to run into dishonest players in the wild. I just want this video to give you ideas on how to reduce some of the feels bads of the game associated with deck building issues, and help you grow into the Chad or Chadalina deck builder you were always meant to be. So once again, I'm S Freezy, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe, and maybe check out some more of my stuff on my channel. I have a whole playlist of optimized deck decks here for commanders I find interesting. Our next deck building bootcamp will be all about removal, what to run, how much to run, and how to use it. So until next time, stay frosty out there and keep on brewing.